Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We will start now with the next session that will deal with the vital topic of exploring Arctic environmental challenges, viewing responses, and shaping future strategies. As you can guess from the title, it will deal with environmental issues in the Arctic and its influence to the rest of the world. The session is kindly sponsored by the Korea Maritime Institute as well as the Korea Polar Research Institute. And for the session will be also in Korean, so if you need translation services, please move down to the first two rows where you have the translation services placed. Now I would like to kindly hand over to Professor Hyunjung Kim, Professor at the Department of Political Science at Yonsei University, who will moderate the session. Dear Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to this session. I am Kim Hyunjung, professor at the Department of Political Science at Yonsei University. The session is co-sponsored by the Yonsei University, the Korea Maritime Institute, and the Korea Polar Research Institute. I am a researcher investigating policies regarding the Arctic research, and since last year, we have been hosting the session on this topic, so I'm very pleased to be part of this. We have the Arctic region where we have the land, the seas, and the ice sleets, and they account for about 6% of the total Earth area. I teach courses on the Arctic area, and students are surprised that there are so many activities taking place in the Arctic region. And I believe that most of Koreans and people around the world are not very familiar with what the Arctic is doing and what people are doing there. But we have been experiencing extreme weather conditions, including floods and droughts and heavy rains. And these climate events are related to what's happening in the Arctic. Together with Iceland and Norway, Korea has been participating in Arctic research. In 2020, in 2012, our Dasan Research Center was open, and in 2012, we acquired the status of a stakeholder in the Arctic, and the Arctic-related law was established, and we have the basic plan on the Arctic activities. So when you look at this basic plan for Arctic activities, there are main areas, and one of them is about environmental protection and climate change responses. And it shows that Korea is very interested in this region. The Arctic region is heavily affected by the climate events. We're going to address some of the challenges that we're experiencing in the Arctic region and how we can respond to them. And for that, we have 4 panel members. And after their presentations, we're going to have a Q&A session. Now, I'd like to give each presenter 10 minutes for their presentation. The first presenter is Professor Seung-gyu Kim. He's a professor at the Department of Marine Science at Incheon National University, and he's an environmental scientist. He has been doing research on environmental preservation, and since 2013, the professor has been studying the impact of plastic on the environment. And today, Professor Kim is going to talk about sustainability and how we can protect the environment of the Arctic region. Please go ahead.
As introduced, I am Seung-gyu Kim, teaching at Incheon National University. My topic is the current status of microplastic pollution in the Arctic Ocean and implications for the sustainability of the Arctic environment. Thank you very much for inviting me as the speaker. So after Big Bang, Earth was born, and if you compare Earth back then to the present day look, a lot of changes. And evolution also led to, evolution was a result of the interaction between various organic matter and inorganic matters. And also this evolution can be observed through many fossils that we can find. But like billions of years ago, as to what the Earth looked like billions of years ago, we need to get more specific data. And those data can be taken from the sediment in deep sea. So we extract samples from deep sea sediment, and then we look at also the iceberg. So basically, we also take some portion of the iceberg in polar regions, and we look at some biochemical tracers, for example, to understand what happened in the ancient prehistoric era, and then it helps us to understand what the future might look like. So there are some concerns about the planetary environment, for example, climate change and acidification of the ocean, ozone depletion, and also plastic pollution. Plastic was mass-produced starting 1950. The production volume grew annually about 8%. So plastic has been in use for only about 7 decades. But is plastic really threatening the Earth environment? So that is still a question many scientists are dealing with. So in order for something to impact the Earth, that factor needs to be really widely dispersed, globally dispersed. So if you look at the chart here, you can see that a lot of plastics come from Asian countries. 60 to 70% of plastic volume comes from Asia, and a lot of them go into the ocean. And annually, about 1 million tons of plastic goes into the oceans, and they can ride on sea currents. That is how they get dispersed around the world. There are about 5 major currents, ocean currents in the world, and so plastics, they ride on these currents, and then they tend to communicate in certain areas. And microplastic, they're really, really micro, so they can actually fly in the air as well. So basically, everywhere in the world, you can find microplastics, including the polar region, the Arctic region as well. And the microplastics, they can be consumed by planktons or accumulated with the plankton. Then the plankton becomes heavier, and they tend to go down into the ocean. So that is how we get to find the microplastics even in deep sea conditions. And second, there are about 99% of the plastics that we use that come from oil originally. So based on certain guess or theory, about 6% of the global oil production was used to produce plastic, and that is only going to go up to 20% in a few years. So a considerable portion of global oil production is used in producing plastic. So given that the fossil fuel, in the process of using fossil fuel, a lot of greenhouse gas is inevitably emitted. So as we use, consume, and bury or sometimes burn plastic products, the overall volume is going to contribute to the carbon emission. The contribution to carbon emission is only going to go up to 15% by some estimation. So plastic usage is really a direct cause of greenhouse gas emission. As you can see here, there are some enzyme that decomposes plastic. There are various types of such enzymes. And as you can see here, so you can see from where plastic goes into the ocean, and also you can see where there are many types of enzymes that can decompose microplastic. And you can see that these areas overlap. What does this tell you? It means that prior to the usage of microplastic, there are new types of enzymes that are being generated. And also microplastic, when they go into the soil, it can change the soil structure, the soil condition. And also we use fertilization, so nutrients are used, and nutrients are also impacted by microplastic as well. If microplastic goes into the air, then it can also impact some cloud. So it can function as a cloud condensation nuclei or ice nucleating particles, causing bigger rainfall. So it can also impact the Earth's ability to radiate energy. So it can also contribute to climate change as well. That's what plastic does in the air. So plastic is basically, it moves around everywhere. It goes into the earth, and it can go into the air, and it can go into the sea. And plastic is and it is also closely related with the overall carbon circulation. So microplastic can disrupt the carbon circulation, the natural carbon circulation system in the earth. So all these impacts. Prior, when we talk about microplastic, we only talked about its harmful harmful impact on biological life. But microplastic does more than that. It can actually disrupt ecosystem. So is it already impacting in that way? There's no conclusive answer among scientists because there's no confirmation as to that. But still, microplastic as it goes into the air, sea, and the land, and how much of it is accumulated in the air and the soil and sea, and how small is it, and what is the percentage of the accumulation. We need to know that first to answer the question that I asked. That is why we conduct these kind of research. So how much microplastic is produced, and where does it originate, where does it go into, and how much is it accumulated at certain sites. But so we have only estimates so far about these questions. So some people argue that from the 1950s and up to now, the microplastic is accumulated about 150 million ton under the sea, and they presuppose, they hypothesize that this is in the sea, in the current, still riding on the current. But some people argue that no, it is already accumulated in the soil, in the sediment, in deep sea. And some people also differ. No, it's not that much. It's only much smaller, like only 300,000 ton under the sea. So different estimations depending on who you ask. So that is also why we need to have a more accurate understanding about this. So we want to have so at my research center, we studied the reflux volume of microplastics that ride on the current, and how much microplastic is found in the Arctic area. So you need to think about the Arctic area conditions as well. So for example, in winter, everything is basically frozen till the deep down in the Bering Sea. Only very small portion is not like frozen during winter season. And also the ice barrier is an important indicator depending on the season. But this ice barrier is now moving more, it's receding more northward due to the climate change. So as the speaker previously talked about, so there are definitely physical changes happening to the earth. And also that is also impacting the extreme weather conditions we are experiencing in Korea. And also nowadays people are charting a new shipping route on the Arctic Sea. That is also becoming a new factor, and that is also causing some environmental problems. The North Sea, often called to be clean sea, but it is already being threatened. It is already being polluted. For example, due to large volume of microplastics, it's already relevant paper is already published on Nature. And this is also based on our research as well. So this is the western part of the Arctic Sea. So the marked red, this area, this is here. The surface takes up only about 15% of the North Sea, the Arctic Sea. But if you look at the microplastic accumulated here, measured here, is already 28,000 ton. So this much microplastic is already accumulated inside Arctic Sea. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce this research that we've done, but only briefly. But if you can, this paper is published in Science Advance. So if you want to know more, you can actually look up the paper in this publication. And also these are how the sea currents flow in this area. So the ice barrier, as you can see, is being receding gradually over decades towards the North Pole. So we believe that because of that, microplastics also receded into the further north area, and And in the process, microplastics fell into the deeper sea as they were moving into further north area of the North Pole. So based on this study, we can actually see that microplastics, as they were riding on the current, they get widely dispersed. But as the ice barrier recedes, the microplastic begins to accumulate at certain areas. And also the concentration of the microplastic tend to go up during summer season when the ice barrier recedes. And also, if you look at the composition of the microplastic in this area, is very different from other areas. For example, polypropylene tends to float on the surface. But in this area, the polyethylene goes down under the sea. So here, there's something at work here to make it happen. And that factor is the plankton here. And the plankton is at work here somehow. It contributes to this lightweight microplastic go deeper into the sea. And this is another study that we've done. And so we look at the sediment, the soil sediment, and then we classified it into different layers. And then we can understand from which era, which year this soil layer is from. So depending on that, so by looking at that, we can see how much microplastic is accumulated in a given year. So we were able to see that over the past few decades, microplastic accumulation, the volume of it just increased. And after 1950s, after the microplastic production volume skyrocketed, the same happened with the accumulation of microplastic in this area. And if you look at what about the CIS area? What about the ocean water? What about the soil sediment? So what about in the land area after 1960s? So about 210,000 tons of microplastics are in the western area of the North Sea, the polar area, and also most of them accumulated in the sediment, and that is the conclusion of this calculation. Then this volume, so compared to the rest of the global ocean, how much is this accumulation in this area? So we took this data, and then we supposing that there should be an equal level of pollution around the world in all seas around the world. Then we figure that the total global pollution volume is over 100 million ton, and then we use the extrapolation method to make a comparison, and then 200 million ton. But most of them are like bigger plastics. On the microplastics, it's only about 80 million ton. So if you use a top-down approach, it's only about 80 million ton microplastic. But if you use the extrapolation that I talked about earlier, it's much bigger number. So the pollution level in the North Sea is much higher compared to the global average. So that is the message here. So again, it's very dangerous situation, the level of the pollution in Arctic Sea in terms of the microplastic pollution. And also the microplastic accumulation is skyrocketing in the soil area, and the increase rate is important here. The global plastic usage volume increased about 8% on average. But when we look at the Californian soil, the accumulation of microplastic increased by 6%. But and also in North Pole area, the accumulation rate is smaller. So the reason for this is quite clear, I believe that. So we consume a lot. So the consumption site, from the consumption site to the accumulation site, because there is an ocean current, and ocean currents it takes time to travel from the consumption site to the accumulation site. So the microplastic tends to be accumulated at a smaller percentage at a remote site away from the consumption site. But what does it also tell you is that as we continue to use plastic products in big volume, the accumulation rate of microplastic in North Pole area is only going to go up, and we are going to see the effect of accumulation in North Pole area years later after we use plastic. So there was a resolution that we need to sign a legally binding international treaty to deal with this issue. So, and why are we talking about this? Why are we studying into this? Why do we need to work on this? Why do we need to have a legally binding treaty to regulate this? Because the impact of using plastic, it can go on years and it can manifest years from now. So that is why now we need to act. If Otherwise, things are going to be out of control. So that is my last point for my presentation. Thank you very much.
김석우 교수님
Thank you very much, Professor Kim, for your presentation. A lot of people think that the Arctic region is very clean and not polluted, but we learned that there's a lot of plastic pollution in the region, and this Arctic region will continue to be affected by plastic pollution, and this is something that we need to address. Next, the next presenter is Professor Jin Kyung. And she's conducting research on climate monitoring, and she's an expert advisor to IPCC panel. And today in her presentation, she's going to be talking about the activities of the Korea Polar Research Institute. Hello, I am Kyung Jin, director at the Department of Policy and Partnership at the Korea Polar Research Institute. I am sure that all of you are aware of the seriousness of the climate crisis. Indeed, last year in July, in the history of 174 years, last year was the hottest year ever. And because of that, we know that the Arctic region is also getting warmer and warmer. And in the Arctic region, you can see that there are some lands as well as ice sheets, and that is why, compared to other areas, the rate of climate change is 4 to 6 times faster than other regions in the Arctic region. In particular, not only the sea ice in the Arctic region, but also the sea ice in the Antarctic region have been melting and shrinking. So a lot of scientists gathered to discuss how we can address this disappearance, the rapid disappearance of sea ice in the polar regions. And this is a serious issue because it is going to impact the sustainability of the future for our future generations. So we need urgent action, and there is a strong call for urgent action among the scientist community. And when the Arctic sea ice continues to disappear, there will be a feedback, and the methane will be released. And the melting of the Greenland ice sheet will lead to higher sea levels. So the entire processes will continue to take place because of the disappearance of the Arctic ice sea. And the Arctic sea ice melting will have an impact, a negative impact on the ecosystem. Planktons will disappear, and those who feed on these planktons, especially birds and fish will have to migrate, and birds that eat on these fish will also suffer from lack of food. However, when the Arctic sea ice is shrinking, there will be new sea routes. This is a positive consequence of the disappearance of Arctic seas. As the climate continues to get warmer, there will be more and more routes that can be utilized for human transportation. In 2021, there were ships that were following these new sea routes, but because of the cold surge, these ships were stuck in the ice and they were deranged, and a lot of people died, and there was a rescue operation to help them. And this means that when the climate change continues, there will be abrupt cold surges that can occur more frequently. And in order to anticipate and predict such cold surges, we need more research because the current technology is not able to accurately predict them. So going forward, when climate change continues to worsen, such cold surges may occur more frequently and more strongly. And when climate change continues, people say that extreme weather events will take place in the polar region as well. And last year it was really hot. So in early January this year, in the northern American regions, there was cold surges and cold sweeps, and a lot of people died because of winter storms. And EVs were not able to operate properly in the cold weather. So this means that we need more technology, advanced technology, to respond to and adapt to these climate changes. So in this context, the Korean Polar Research Institute aims to provide monitoring and information and prediction of the climate and environmental changes in the Arctic region. So this is the mission of our institute. We focus on adaptation, mitigation, and responses to climate change, as well as carbon emissions reduction. The basis for such actions is to understand how quickly and to what extent these Arctic ice will continue to melt, and such research is conducted by our institute. And to be more specific, we study the past climate changes and monitor the current environmental and climate changes to be able to make predictions for the future. Also, we are studying impacts of Arctic climate change on Korea, especially cold spells during the winter and heat waves in the summer. And based on such research, we are trying to provide more accurate prediction information and of what will happen in the Arctic region and what kind of impact that will have on Korea. And we are trying to expand our role. So we are planning to build a ice-breaking research vessel for polar research. We want to be a leader in Arctic research. In addition, we are aiming to provide more accurate prediction, climate prediction, and provide warnings on climate change. And this is going to contribute to achieving sustainable development goals. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Dr. Jin, for your presentation. We now know that having accurate information on the sea ice in the polar region is crucial, and that is what COPRI is doing. And I hope that your research scope will continue to expand. Let me introduce the third presenter, Ji Kim. And she's a director at the Northern and Polar Region Research Division of the Korea Maritime Institute. And since 2020, she's been involved in economic cooperation and polar sea routes. And she's an expert on Russia. So the title of the presentation is The Possibility of Cooperation Between Korea and Iceland. Hello, everyone. I am Kim Ji, Director of the Northern and Polar Regions Research Division at the Korea Maritime Institute. Thank you for this opportunity. When I was asked to give a presentation, Professor Hyunjung Kim said that the audience would be small, but I see a lot of people sitting here, so maybe I was tricked into doing this, but I will do my best to deliver my presentation. The topic, as you can see, is a possibility of cooperation between Korea and Iceland in developing eco-friendly electric small fishing vessels. Let me give you the background. Dr. Kyung-jin already discussed the seriousness of climate change, and with the melting of sea ice, we see more. We now have more sea routes. We have the war in Ukraine, the Suez Canal incident, and the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, we have seen some disruptions in the global supply chains. As the supply chains become more unstable, logistics costs will increase, and as a result, the total supply chain costs will increase, and this will lead to higher consumer prices. Therefore, what we need to think about is how we can address these supply chain bottlenecks. When there is an issue that disrupts the supply chain, how can we address that? This is a key issue that we need to address. And one of the solutions, potential solutions to address supply chain issues is utilizing Arctic sea routes. Indeed, Russia is trying to increase the utilization of Arctic sea routes, and Russia and China are the main countries that are utilizing the Arctic routes. You can see at the bottom graph the volume of traffic or cargo traffic going through the Arctic region, and it's been increasing ever since 2017. And Since 2020, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the war in Ukraine in 2022, you can see the graph or the line has been flattened, but the overall trend is an upward trend. So you may imagine that Arctic sea routes can connect between Europe and Asia, and currently they're mainly utilized by China and Russia, but also from the European side, they have been utilizing parts of these Arctic routes to a certain extent. So then, because we have now more and more routes utilizing the Arctic, we need more regulations. So the IMO has adopted several regulations. In particular, the polar codes have been adopted by IMO. Now, the Arctic countries are trying to maintain sustainability in the region, and they're strengthening eco-friendly regulations, not only in the Arctic region, but around the world. There have been attempts and investments in developing eco-friendly ships. In particular, commercial vehicles and other ferries, they are making a transition to ammonia fuel and other eco-friendly fuels. And recently, in the US, in the National Renewable Research Institute, the hybrid battery diesel system was implemented in the vessels to reduce the fuel consumption by 80%. This was a research result. In the case of Ireland, they have been doing retrofit to power these vessels with electricity, and they were successful in commercializing it. In Norway and in Denmark and in Finland, they are focusing on the ferries for passengers, and they have been converting them to electronic or electric-powered vessels. My research area is focused on fishing vessels. You may not see much of a connection between fishing vessels and the Arctic region, but in the Arctic region, there are indigenous people, and they rely on fishing. So we need to see how fishing practices can be made possible in the Arctic. There are open seas in the Arctic region, and when vessels come in and go, then we need some preventive regulations in place and in ready so that we can prevent overfishing in the Arctic region. So we need to really think about sustainability and sustainable operation. And for that region, CAOFA was adopted. This is the ground rule for sustainable fisheries in the Arctic region. And this is also to allow research on marine resources in the region. As I mentioned, for sustainable fisheries, we need eco-friendly fishing vessels. And this will not only help benefit indigenous people, but also in Ireland and Norway, they have advanced fishing industries. So the topic of my presentation is how we can cooperate with countries like Iceland for eco-friendly vessel development. Let me give you the current status of Iceland fishing vessel fleet. 8.1% of the total GDP comes from the fisheries. And when it comes to the number of fishing vessels, it's relatively small compared to Korea. In Korea, the number of vessels is on the decline. And secondly, as I said before, they have been doing some retrofitting to utilize electricity for fishing. And so there are charging stations ready for vessels. And the third characteristic is that they rely more on coastal fishing vessels rather than far ocean fishing. So compared to Korean fishing vessels, they don't need a larger battery capacity because they remain near the coasts. Compared to that, let's take a look at the current situation of the Korean fishing vessels. The fishing vessel ages become older and older. And as a result, there is a higher accident rate. On the left-hand side, you can see the age of fishing vessels older than 21 years old. That's the navy color, and you can see that the navy portion is increasing. And on the right-hand side, you can see the number of accidents happening on the seas, and it's been increasing as well. And Korea is the 14th greenhouse gas emitters in the world. And since 2021, the line is flat, but overall, we need to reduce emissions, and eco-friendly vessels will contribute to that. And compared to the Iceland, Korean fishing vessels utilize diesel, so there's lower energy efficiency, and they produce pollutants. So it is crucial to transform or transition them into more eco-friendly vessels. Now, among the ships that go through the Arctic, what is the percentage of fishing vessels? Let's take a look at the data. We have the ASTD data, Arctic Ship Traffic Data. It is provided by 6 countries, the Arctic Group, and there are 6 working groups, and one of them is producing this data. And this may not be a perfect data per se because they do not track individual vessels, but they capture how many vessels per type or category in order to calculate emissions from these types of vessels. So this may not be an accurate type of data, but you can still see the trend. There are 15 types of vessels defined by the ASTD, and one of them is the fishing vessels. When you access the ASTD, you can see this type of data on the left-hand side. The blue line by segment or by section, you can see what types of vessels utilize these routes and how much pollution is caused by these vessels passing through these routes. They did not do on-site monitoring, but they do estimation. And my topic is Iceland, so I'm going to zoom in onto this particular country. And you can see this red rectangle and this box. And this is the Iceland and Parrot Islands. This is a route on the right-hand side. And here, in this area, the purple line represents fishing vessels, and you can see that the majority of the vessels is fishing vessels. And here, in the the Greenland, you can see fishing vessels take up the largest portion. And when you look at other sections, you can find that fishing vessels take up a large portion of the vessels that utilize Arctic sea routes. So in this regard, what kind of potential cooperation we can pursue between Korea and Iceland? Many local governments are promoting eco-friendly vessels, so there have been a lot of investments in Jeju for vessels less than 100,000 tons, so that's about 10% of the total vessels. And among them, 60% of these vessels are very old. It means that their vessels are overall older than the national average. So in Jeju, it is urgent for them to make a transition to eco-friendly vessels to replace these older vessels. So large investments have been made. And in Jeju, the percentage of eco-friendly vessels is 22%, and they are also implementing the EV promotion program. So overall, they can apply this to the fishing vessel fleet. And in Pohang, they are restructuring their industrial systems, and one of the key initiatives for Pohang is the EV or electric battery, and they've designated their some area of Pohang City as the special zone for EV development. So they're conducting demonstration projects and they're doing R&D. In the case of Iceland, you can see the kinds of policies they have in place. So they are providing a lot of government support for eco-friendly vessels. As I mentioned, there's retrofit program that is also sponsored by the government. And together with Iceland, we have this type of cooperation. And to do so, we need a balance. We need to be able to give and take and create a win-win relationship. So what can we give and what can we get from Iceland? This is what I thought about. Korea has technology of hybrid fishing vessels, and we can share policies on relevant regulations. And we can also share some parts of the battery technology, even though this may be a sensitive topic. And so Korea and Iceland can conduct joint research for eco-friendly vessels, and we can utilize equipment manufacturing facilities in Busan and other areas to manufacture them. And in the case of Iceland, they have retrofit technology for coastal fishing vessels, so we can learn from them. And they also have policies and programs put in place for charging infrastructure, so we can exchange ideas and learn best practices from them. And for battery, we not only need a battery technology, but also we need battery compatible equipment technology, so we can exchange know-hows and expertise in this area. But there are some challenges and issues that we need to overcome to make this a successful cooperation. First of all, there are different maritime or marine environments between Korea and Iceland in terms of sea temperatures and waves. So these are the kinds of conditions that may factor into the design of the vessels, so we need to consider that. And in the case of Iceland, they have lower sea temperatures, so they need to focus on insulation for heat preservation. So we need to consult on this matter with Iceland. And the second issue has to do with the Arctic indigenous communities. Sustainability is not just about preserving the environment, but also it is about preserving the lifestyles of indigenous communities in the region. And indigenous community, these members are main users of the fishing vessels, eco-friendly fishing vessels. But when we conducted a survey, well, these indigenous people know that the environmental and sustainability is important, but they are not really aware of the specific aspects of ship designs and so on. So if we are to make a transition to eco-friendly ships, we will need to persuade them, we need to engage them, and we need to help them better understand the need. So for sustainability, we will have to ask them to understand the need to replace their older ships with more eco-friendly fishing vessels. And with that, I'd like to wrap up my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much, Director Kim. In order for sustainable fisheries, we not only need sustainable practices, but also more eco-friendly vessels. Now, I'd like to introduce the final presenter, principal researcher Jung-hyo Choi at the Research Institute at Hanwha Ocean. And he is evaluating the stability of larger commercial vessels. And for the first and for the best, he has involved in developing new and better ships. And today in his presentation, he's going to be talking about the challenges of Arctic ships. Thank you.
기반기술연구소에서
Good morning. I'm Choi Jung-hyo from Hanwha Ocean. It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
일단 저희 조선업이라는 분야가
The shipbuilding industry is kind of a specific engineering area, so has its own language, and I don't think it's familiar to many people here. So I try to think about what materials might be easier for audience to understand. So still, we used to be called Daewoo Heavy Industry, but now we are Hanwha Ocean. We are located in Geoje City. As you can see, this is the picture of our shipyard from the satellite. So design team, research team, they are in our Seoul office. But in also Siheung location, we have a large research center. So that is where we develop various ship types. The reason why I'm showing you the satellite image is that on the left-hand side of the picture, there is an apartment complex. So apartment complex, I don't know if you're familiar with this. So these apartment complexes are almost very comparable to any apartment complex you can see in this whole area. But anything that you see in red this is actually one ship. So you can kind of compare the size of one ship to the apartment complex. And this is the kind of a large scale ships that we are building at our shipyard. And also here, we also build LNG carriers for which we are kind of world renowned. And on the right-hand side, you can see the LNG carriers actually in operation. About 50% of LNG carriers in operation around the world were built by us. So probably you've seen many of these LNG carriers on Korean media. And also we build submarines for the Korean military. And also icebreaker as well. So icebreaking is what this ship is doing. So that is why this ship is called an icebreaker. And we also was one of the first shipbuilding company that developed an icebreaker. And what I do then, so on the right-hand side, so this is what I do. So my job is about make sure that the ship will not cut in half in ocean. So it's about safety and stability of the ship. So to come up with a better design, for example. And also, so we conduct a lot of tests. And also to demonstrate our concept, we also have a lot of measurement equipment on the ship. And then we measure a lot of conditions of the ship. And for example, you probably seen many tests where two cars collide into each other. Cars are not cheap products. So for that, cars still you can manufacture model prototype cars to conduct such an experiment. But these ships, their cost is about 20-30 billion in Korean won, even more than that. So we cannot just build the prototype ships to conduct a collision test, for example. So we actually run some models, and we come up with a better design to make sure that such accident will not happen. And in 1989 in Alaska, we had an accident involving Exxon Valdez. So it was oil carrier, and Exxon at that time was #1 oil company in the world. And this accident took place in the most clean sea near Alaska. The oil spill volume was about 37,000 tons of crude oil. And we also had a similar major oil spill in the Korean Sea. But this case was bigger than the Korean accident by 4 times. And here, the red part in the third picture is the polluted area. So once it is polluted, once the sea is polluted, it takes at least 2 or 3 decades for the sea to clean up. And of course, luckily, our sea is capable to clean itself, but it takes such a long time. And so this used to be the cleanest sea in the world. But the largest oil company in the world, they caused this accident. And so after that, Exxon Valdez, they massively invested in ship types, more safer ship design. And also, as the ship navigates, what is ways to ensure its safety? And if there is an oil spill, what should be a speedy manner to handle it? So these were the main research areas for Exxon Valdez, and they really invested a lot of money in that. And actually, my company conducted those research topics as commissioned by Exxon Valdez. And so, for example, just one single hull structure is less safe. So we designed a double hull structure, for example. So even if there's an accident, still a certain level of safety will be ensured. So it was a really unfortunate accident. But after this accident, our design thinking really changed. For example, prior to the accident, the priority of designing a ship was about speeding it up. What will be the best way to ensure the highest speed of the ship? But now priority is really different. After this accident, So it's not about the ship running into something to cause an accident. It is about even if there is an accident, the ship should still be safe. So the structure of the ship became an important topic for research and also for navigation as well. Earlier, the captain and the vice captain were really important, but now more safety-related systems or equipment became important. For example, system to receive signals from satellite became important. And also double plate. As you apply double plates to build a ship becomes heavier and more expensive to build. And if ship becomes too expensive, then the shipping costs also increases as well. So it can also put pressure on your profitability as a shipping company. So then it also requires a new vessel type to meet all these kind of demand. So if you look at the graph here, so on the shipyard, the graph shows you the shipbuilding volume in terms of the weight of the ship per country. So after the Exxon Valdez oil spill, now the design became really important. So after this accident, Korea shipbuilding industry really took off because of our design capability. We even overtook Japan as well. And now global warming. Global warming is also an issue, so a lot of regulations are coming up to deal with it. And shipbuilding industry as well. Shipbuilding industry is subject to regulations by IMO, which is also a UN affiliate. And the regulation first began to deal with air pollution. So back then, it was not directly about global warming. It was more about dealing with air pollutant, for example, SOx and NOx. So ships now need to emit much less of SOx and NOx. But after that, and also typically our vessel weigh about 30,000 ton. But if you go bigger, you can go up to 60,000 ton. For example, LNG carrier carrying gas from Australia to Korea. If you include the gas volume as well, the total vessel weight can go up to 60,000 ton. So once the gas is unloaded from the ship at the destination, the overall weight will go down. But you need to add seawater into the ship to make sure that the ship will be still stable. So and then the ship goes back to its departure port. And then there they need to unload the seawater so that they can upload the gas again. So that is called the vast exchange. That's what we used to work on, and of course the sea near Korea is also not as clean as Australia. So this ballast action is sometimes regulated because they don't want to allow ballast to keep their sea clean. And also CO2 emission as well is being regulated. So you're allowed to emit. It's not that you are allowed to emit a small amount of CO2. Nowadays, you are not allowed to emit CO2 at all. So by 2050. So to do that, we also need to develop technology. So the Exxon Valdez oil spill became a big event to call for new design. And now air pollutant or CO2 emission or for better efficiency, these became important factors to design a ship.
않은 곳으로
항로를 좀 자동
Or for example, to auto-navigate, to find the sea route where there is a more stable ocean conditions. The system it became also important. So navigation and maneuverability. So before the accident, there were different priorities for ship design, and after the accident, now we are prioritizing these things. And also for propulsion, some wind is now being used. So new ship propulsion system is also required. So this is what happened after 2016. So this is the Yamal LNG carrier that we built. It was built after year 2015. So this Yamal carrier, this is for navigation and for cruise, and uses LNG as a fuel, and that it uses a generator to use electricity to propel the ship. And so it barely emits SOx and NOx, and it emits only small amount of CO2. To develop this carrier, we invested in R&D for about 10 years. And we even studied what ice is in this area, and then we applied that knowledge to this ship design. And thankfully, this ship turns out to be quite safe. So most of the ship that move in this Arctic Sea is our ship. And this is our future goal. So a lot of LNG is now used as a fuel for ship, but LNG is also kind of fossil fuel. So we are looking at alternative options, ammonia and hydrogen, for example, and we are studying into these alternative fuels as well. And if you use alternative fuel, you also need to think about carrying it. So we need to have a ship that is able to carry ammonia and hydrogen as well. And so we are now capturing ammonia and the CO2. So once you capture CO2, for example, how do you dispose it? If you choose to bury it, then you also need to find a way to carry it and then bury it. You need to find a container or ship that is able to carry it. So those are really important point. And also, these kind of different types of ship requires different types of propulsion system as well. So we are studying into propulsion system as well. We want to use IT technology as well, for example, satellite. So based on the satellite information, we look at the status of the ship during navigation, and we try to find optimal navigation route or method. And also submarine as well. So if you've seen movies and submarines in movies, you can see that submarine detects underwater radiated noise. That is how you detected the enemy vessel, for example. So this noise is generated when a propeller breaks through the ocean, the sea. So this kind of noise is really unpleasant to the organism living in undersea, for example, fish. And particularly, there are big animals or fish living in Arctic Sea. So to deal with the underwater radiated noise, we have a much shorter air band. And we also demonstrated this idea with a test, and we apply that to certain vessel. So with that, hopefully we can have noiseless and carbon emission free and safe vessel for future generation. Towards that, we are working very hard. Thank you very much.
두 산업이
Thank you for your presentation. We were able to understand how the shipbuilding company is working to enhance sustainability in their business. As I heard these four presentations, I was able to see that eco-friendly policies and sustainability programs will help us enjoy a better future. It is unfortunate that we don't have much time left. So in the remainder of my time, I'm going to ask each presenter a question. And please utilize this time to add any more things that you want to mention. I'd like to ask a question to Professor Kim. You talked about the microplastic pollution, and in the second half of the year, the plastic pollution global agreement may be reached. And in the second half of the year in Busan, we are going to have a meeting to adopt this plastic-related agreement. And so the plastic agreement, what kinds of aspects need to be considered for this to be successful?
Well, first of all, the plastic pollution there needs to be legally binding international agreement. As I mentioned earlier, having that kind of agreement itself is very important. So when there is a regulation, laws tend to be domestic, but there needs to be certain things that need to be internationally regulated. For example, RE100. We talk about RE100, and so if you don't comply with the RE100, you cannot export your product to other countries. So when it comes to environmental issues, this is an international issue. So if the international law is there to govern this issue, and also this is about our life, human beings and animals as well. So we need to protect this life. And sometimes I feel guilty about it. This is a really ethical issue as well, but beyond ethical issue, also economic issue as well. Now, environmental issues are economic issues as well. So once there is a agreed international treaty, then people will be incentivized to replace the plastic with something else, because otherwise you will not be able to export your plastic containing products into other countries. So you will be incentivized to find new options. So that is the kind of effect that I hope to see from the international treaty. So I hope that that kind of contents will be included in the treaty, and also we need to discuss. There will be discussion and maybe disagreement as to at what level, how much are we going to regulate. But so if your country is prepared to do this, you will be okay with the agreement. But if your country is not, maybe you will try to dispute it. But anyhow, we really need to see that this is an important thing to do, and we need to see how much we can be ready. In terms of protecting the polar area, we also need to think about the 8 countries in this area. So there are 8 countries in this area, but it's not just about protecting these 8 countries. These 8 countries, their emission of, for example, microplastics into the Arctic area might be smaller than we think, and also sea route as well. So as more vessels go through the Arctic Sea, there might be more pollution due to these vessels. Then we need to regulate these vessels that go through the Arctic Sea. But that is already being done. For example, IMO regulation, the MARPOL. MARPOL is about regulating the sea pollution due to vessels. And also, for example, microplastic waste, if there is a certain rules that you need to follow, if you are going to release microplastic waste from your vessel, and also fuel as well, fuel oil. How are we going to treat the waste of fuel oil from a vessel? And also eco-friendly shipbuilding. It's not just about what kind of fuel you use. It's about, for example, what kind of paint is okay to be used to coat to paint the ship. So the painting itself sometimes has a lot of plastic. So we need to still have very strong paint coating. So what kind of paint is allowed? So those might be also contents of a future regulation, future treaty, and for other things as well. So we often call the Arctic area as a clean area, but it's still polluted. But it's not from really direct nearby areas. It's actually more transboundary pollution. So we also call that transportation pollution. So the pollutants go into the Arctic area through sea current, for example, or air current. So the areas, these Arctic areas, they just receive a lot of pollutant from other areas. So this treaty that is going to come up about the microplastics, I hope that the treaty will regulate the plastic consumption or usage so that people are incentivized to go for different materials.
Thank you very much. You talked a lot about the plastic treaty, and as a researcher on regulations, I hope that this treaty will be successfully negotiated so that we can address plastics issues.
사실은 뭐 민간
This is a bit sensitive, so I didn't want to bring it up initially, but in order to deal with this issue, a lot of global efforts have been made, and I'm sorry I'm using one disposable cup to drink coffee from it, but still, disposable cups, for example, disposable plastic cups were banned by policy, but unfortunately, these policies are being reversed right now. So it's very unfortunate. And as you are aware, R&D budget was cut significantly for this year. So for this kind of international treaty, so for us to respond to this kind of international treaty, we need to have a lot of scientific evidence, scientific research data. But now the current situation in Korea is kind of going reverse. I know this is a sensitive remarks to make at this point, but I really felt the need to say it in public. So thank you very much.
감사드립니다.
Thank you for your remarks. Next, I'd like to ask a question to Jin Kyung. We have many students in the audience, and they may feel that the polar region is far away, and the Korea Polar Research Institute is working to reach out to students, and if there's any program, please share with us. At the Kopri, we are operating the Dasan Center and the Sejong Center in the Antarctic region, so we do have infrastructure for research and education, and in particular, we have the Dasan Junior program where high school students can have a chance to visit the Arctic region, and the UST or the degree program under the master's and the PhD program is available. So if you are interested, you can join the program and conduct research in the Arctic region, including environment and the policy making. So you will be able to get such opportunities. And on a lighter note, we have the social media platforms, YouTube and other social media accounts to promote general public's understanding. And you will also have a chance to go and visit exhibitions to understand what we're doing. I wish I could go back to being a student and apply. So thank you for your information. Now I'd like to ask a question to Kim. You talked about the cooperation between Iceland and Korea. And so what do you think about potential cooperation between Korea and other northern countries? Thank you for the question. Currently, the cooperation project between Korea and Iceland is based on the basic plan for Arctic activities. If you do Google on that, you can understand the basic plan of the government on Arctic activities. And one of them is the Arctic 8 project. So this project, Arctic 8 project, is about cooperating with 8 Arctic countries. And there are different areas of potential cooperation with 8 different countries in the Arctic region. So one representative example is that unfortunately, because of the war in Ukraine, we're not really able to cooperate with Russia. But before the war, we had official cooperation proposals from Russia through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that there are they wanted to build a carbon-free village in the Arctic region, and they wanted our support. So the basic concept is that they will use only hydrogen and renewable energy to operate this base in the Arctic region so that it can be energy independent village. And Korea has advanced hydrogen technology, and that is why they wanted to work with us for this energy independent village. So we had some discussions, and then the war broke out. So currently this project is suspended. At that time, Russia was the chair of the Arctic Committee, and so we thought that this was going to go well, but because of the war, it's been suspended. Now we have this basic plan for Arctic activities, and based on this plan, we will continue to engage with other Arctic countries. Thank you. I hope that there will be more collaborative research, and I hope to be able to hear from you additional research findings. Thank you. I'd like to now ask a question to Principal Researcher Choi at Hanwha Ocean. Fast shipping was critical, but now it's not only fast navigating, but also safe navigation is critical. That was quite impressive. With respect to Arctic routes, we need to design our vessels for maximum safety, but what are the challenges?
뭐 선박을 디자인하는 건
Designing a vessel is actually my kind of expertise area. So rather than difficulties, it's also important for me to understand the navigation environment. So I need to have that information about the environment, where the ship is going to navigate. For me, with that information, I design the ship. And for example, how long, how frequent wave is at work in a given sea. But in the case of ice, and there's a lot of ice in the Arctic Sea, we don't have much ice in our sea. So, and we don't have like thawing season in our sea. So I need to travel a lot to the Arctic area sometimes to get the data about the ice. So based on that data, we design the ship. And then next time when we were designing a new ship, I was worried about using the old data, but then I got to meet Kopri people, and they were monitoring the conditions in North Pole area. So we were able to use their data, and that really speeded up our design process for the shipbuilding. And we are trying to, so to that end, we are trying to build a good relationship with Kopri so that we can benefit from their data. But scientists often, they sometimes R&D efforts are oriented towards certain issues, but monitoring the environment takes a long time. So when you have a long-term data, those data are very valuable. So sometimes we cannot have a monitoring continuity due to certain issues.
기억이 필요.
So you mentioned that continuous monitoring is crucial. Thank you. Thank you for staying with us for this plenary session. And I hope that this will help reboot the SDGs and reset our future. And so once again, thank you very much. With that, we'd like to wrap up the session. Thank you.
And dear speakers, for discussing with us necessary actions for environmental protection for the Arctic and beyond. We've heard now on the example of the Arctic that we need international agreement, research and development, and scientific data to have the right policies and to be able to adapt our lifestyles. Moving on, it's time to take a break, and we will resume at 1 p.m. For our next session, which is all about insights from the Global Green Growth Project by the World Bank. See you back here at 1 p.m. Thank you.